This month's speaker is Howard Meyer, a longtime resident of Berkeley Heights, New Providence, Summit, and been on the rescue squads, plural, forever. My mother was on the same squad with him. Our last presenter, Dean Epler, his mother, Svea Epler, was on the squad at the same time. So there's a lot of connections here. When you live in one place for a long time, get a lot of interconnections. Anyway, so Howie's been very dedicated to rescue squad. And this presentation today is going to be on the state and local levels and just how it's evolved over time. So without any further ado, Howie Meyer.
I didn't expect that this would be a membership recruitment drive when I came in. I am a member of the the New Providence Lions, and I have been a member of the New Providence EMS. So when you gentlemen leave, there will be people outside the door from the New Providence Lions and the rescue squad with applications. Rich said, you got to tell them a little bit about yourself. And I said, okay, a little bit. I joined the Berkeley Heights Rescue Squad in October 1971, and I've served and continue to serve with that. I serve as a delegate at a state organization for the EMS Council of New Jersey. I've served on their mobilization committee. We'll go over what mobilization actually means and some of the events that we've been involved in. I served as district VP for Union County, and I served as president of the council for 3 years. I've also served as their volunteer legislative director for 30 years, and there's a few people in Trenton and Washington who were very glad to see me give up that position. I also volunteer with the pilot program out of Overlook Hospital starting in 1975 for the paramedics. I rode with them for approximately 12 to 14 years, and I was a driver paramedic assistant. No, I didn't become a paramedic. I couldn't afford to take the pay cut. I established, with the cooperation of the CEO of ADP, an industrial squad in Roseland. Roseland was, as all squads do, volunteer squads do, and even your page nowadays, had problems getting full crews for daytime. Josh Weston came to me and said, what can we do for them? And I said, well, we could help. We could make an industrial squad. So we had an industrial squad for a number of years with ADP while I was with them. And basically what that meant was that 6 days a week, 6 days a month, we would give them a crew. I served as a member of the Quakertown Volunteer EMS Agency in Hunterdon County. And I also serve currently as a member for special events for the Hoboken Ambulance Corps, Volunteer Ambulance Corps. And yes, Hoboken has a volunteer ambulance corps. And finally, last but not least, when I retired from what I considered my Walter Mitty job and wanted to get more into emergency services, I became a 911 dispatcher for about 14 years. I worked with Summit Police Department. I worked with Mountain Valley. If anybody comes up and looks at the shirt, no, it's not a squad shirt. It's a Mountain Valley shirt because it's the only long sleeve shirt I could find this morning. Just a little bit about my background quickly. I'm also a teacher. I was an EMT instructor for over 25 years, CPR instructor for over 35 years. I still teach, although I don't have any current certifications, but I enjoyed it working with the volunteers, and I'm looking forward to getting back into it. This year I serve as First Lieutenant training for the Berkeley Heights Volunteer Rescue Squad. What is EMS? EMS is a system providing medical care before a patient arrives at the hospital. It includes first responders. It includes emergency medical responders, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, dispatch and transportation units. In New Jersey, both volunteer and paid services operate together as one system, a system of laws and regulations guiding these efforts. What happens when you need an ambulance? You dial 911. Back when, before 911, it was dial the operator, if you couldn't remember the police number. And then you had to remember what town you were in. The operator had to say, okay, I'm getting the police dispatcher on the line. For any of you folks who live up in the Murray Hill area, that was a bit of a problem even when I was dispatching, because you've got a different mailing address, you pay your taxes to a different address, and there's basically 3 towns up there. So it became interesting for the operators. We're now with 911. Okay, you call 911. What happens? they're going to ask you what the address is first. They're not going to ask you what the emergency is. They're not going to ask you your name first. They're going to ask you what is the address where the emergency is. But how come? Because if you happen to be the one with the emergency and you drop the phone before you give us the first piece of information, it's going to take us a little bit longer to get there. We now track cell phones. All of your landline phones give us an address that pop up on the screen so we know where you are when you call. If you're on a cell phone, it takes a little bit more ingenuity to locate you. Then they're going to ask you your name. They're going to ask you what the emergency is. Provide as much information as you can. Believe me, I understand the pressure and the angst that's going on when you're on 911. But it's vitally important to responders to get as much information ahead of time so we know what we're walking into and we know what resources we need. The other thing, do not hang up. As long as you're on 911, the operator, 911 call taker has a connection between you and the first responders. If the operator says, okay, I'm going to disconnect now, fantastic. But do not hang up until the operator says, okay, you can hang up now. If you're the only one there, the operator may ask you to put your phone on speaker and then ask if you're willing to try and help the individual. We can give CPR instructions over the phone. It's chest only compressions. We've learned through studies over the years that chest only compressions without breaths keeps a patient viable for anywhere from 6 to 10 minutes with the oxygen that's already in their body. Funny thing, years ago, they revived people by rolling them over a barrel. What we've found with studies is we create the same bellows effect with chest compressions. And basically, you're going to be told to find the center of the chest and pump deep and fast, okay? The call taker who took the call is going to send it on to the operator who's going to dispatch the appropriate emergency services. That can be police department, whoever's covering for EMS, fire, paramedics. PD will almost always arrive first in the circumstances in the communities that are in this area. I think this is so important that I have a big note here. I'm going to stop and ask if anybody has any questions with respect to the process, because truly the process followed is life-saving. Okay. Sure. We did until OEMS outlawed them. We'll talk a little bit about OEMS later on. It's the Office of Emergency Medical Services in Trenton. They were really happy to see me step down. Yeah, no, we stopped. We've also retired our horses and buggies. New Jersey before modern EMS. That was your ambulance. That was the newest style, okay? That ambulance was, I believe, the first ambulance the Bellevue Hospital in New York City had. And they retired, well, they put on standby their horse and carriage at that point in time. The only problem with this vehicle was it was great going level and downhill. When it had to go uphill, a lot of times the horses came out to pull this up the hill to get to the hospital. There was no standardized EMS system. The transport was often provided by funeral homes, police, hospitals, or the nearest vehicle that could move, be that horse and buggy or Model T. Care varied widely, very little medical equipment, and the need for community-based emergency care grew as the towns expanded. Early volunteering, 1920s. The earliest squads demonstrated how varied communities, beach towns, suburbs, and municipalities, urban boroughs, relied on volunteer EMS. The earliest volunteer first aid squad in New Jersey, and the first in the country, was established in 1927 by the Belmar First Aid Squad. This marked the start of the organized community-based medical services response with an emphasis on training and dedicated ambulances. Their first ambulance was a converted milk truck. So yes, I put ambulances in here, but there was no such thing basically as an ambulance back then. Just in case you hear, Virginia Beach likes to claim they were the first volunteer ambulance squad in the United States. They weren't. They started in 1929, Pikers. So just be aware that Jersey was at the forefront and has been at the forefront of EMS for a long time. This is the Belmar First Aid Squad finder. Charlie was a volunteer firefighter, worked for the electric company. And what happened in Belmar is what unfortunately happened in too many communities as a result of a tragedy. That's what got Charlie saying, we need to have some type of organization. This, thank God, was not a fatal fatal situation. Not like many, many other towns who started after the issues were fatal in the involvement. So Charlie got a group of firefighters, local physicians to create the Volunteer First Aid Squad. And away from informal ad hoc transportation, i.e., Charlie, is that your Model T? Yeah, get it over here. And off we go. In case you're interested, the emergency that generated this, there was a fire in Belmar, and a police officer ran into the house because there was somebody in there. Police officer saved the person, but in so doing, had to knock out a window and cut his main artery in his arm. Had Charlie not been there, because the electric company did train all of their people in some basic first aid, he was able to stop the bleeding, get the officer to the hospital, and the officer was fine. Very few people were that lucky back then. This is a picture of the Belmar First Aid Squad and their first ambulance. I can't tell you how long it lasted. I can't tell you how long any of them lasted. But this was the very first ambulance of a volunteer first aid squad in New Jersey. And they're very proud of the fact. They make sure everybody knows they were the first in the country. Other early examples are the Spring Lake First Aid Squad, which was formed in 1928. They answered their first calls in a borrowed milk truck. I keep thinking about, I wonder what it was like for the milk driver to get into the truck after there was a call and what they found in the back of the milk truck before they delivered milk. Manasquan First Aid Squad was founded in 1929 and was founded by a firefighter, which is often the case for Manasquan, using a converted 1929 panel truck as their first ambulance. Other early squads were the Fairhaven Volunteer Fire Department, Emergency Corps in 1930, South Amboy First Aid and Safety Squad in 1933, and the Pompton Lakes First Aid Squad in 1935. With the founding of Belmar Squad, it worked outwards from Belmar. Charlie was recruited by a number of towns in the area to come into their town and start first aid squads, and they began to pop up all over the state. Formation of these squads demonstrated the growing community support and need for volunteer EMS organizations. These early squads marked the beginning of a structured volunteer EMS system in the state, rooted in community initiative and local commitment. The post-World War II suburban boom saw an even larger blow up. And what happened there was the veterans coming home from the wars realized that they were able to receive better and faster care on the battlefield than they could and their neighbors could get in the communities back home. So the veterans began to lead the charge to create more volunteer EMS agency across. Wayne Township Memorial First Aid Squad started in 1944, and here was a situation where it was due to delays in ambulances getting to emergencies in Wayne, which unfortunately resulted in several fatalities the previous year. That was the generator in Wayne. We need an ambulance squad. By the 1950s and 70s, volunteer squads were becoming a standardized way for towns to guarantee EMS coverage. For instance, the Millburn Short Hills Volunteer First Aid Squad began in 1958 and received its first ambulance, a donated Cadillac, the same year. See, we're coming up from the horse and buggy. We're into Cadillacs now. Locally, volunteer squads continued to be formed into the 90s. The Hoboken Volunteer Ambulance Squad, which is still in existence today, was launched in 1971, again, to address the issue of not enough ambulances in Hudson County. This is 1971. The Long Hill First Aid Squad was founded in 1993 when two squads merged. The Millington First Aid Squad, which was founded in 1941, and the Township of Passaic First Aid Squad in 1974. This is some of the things that have happened or are happening where squads merge because of the difficulties they face, both getting volunteers and from a fiscal situation. These volunteer organizations served and still serve as the primary EMS for their communities. Expansion. Locally, Berkeley Heights Volunteer Rescue Squad was formed in 1942. And no, Rich, I did not help paint the garage door. The New Providence Rescue Squad was founded in 1952, and Summit was formed in 1962. Overlook Hospital provided the hospital service for Summit for a number of years. It got to be too much, and Summit volunteers said, look, we'll take it on. One thing, and I may mention it later on, but I don't want to miss the point here. 911 emergency service in EMS is a money loser. Services that run 911, for the most part, do not make money and do not clear enough to cover their expenses strictly on the billings that they make. The paid services, many of them tend to do transportations, interfacility transfers, which is where they make up the shortfall. But if you talk to anybody here in Union County, the Union County folks will tell you, we're great. We're covering all our expenses. What they can't give you is a breakdown of exactly how much it's costing them to run the county backup system. So when your local squad comes to you for dollars, understand, hopefully they're covering their expenses and able to put monies away for equipment, new ambulances, but 911 is a money loser. Let's talk a little bit about those squads. Membership categories. Yes, Rich, I told you I had notes. 3 squads in the area have very similar membership categories with respect to their makeup and their operations. And I will use Berkeley Heights Squad to illustrate somewhat. Berkeley Heights has 59 riding members. Wow, that sounds great. Hold it. We're divided into several categories. We have 35 regular members. And what a regular member is they've completed all of their training and have served as an apprentice, so to speak, with a 2-person crew to train them how to do things, and they've then become a regular and can be part of a 2-person crew. We have 10 associates, which are new members who are working through the process, and we have them at various stages in this. We have 14 student members. Student members, for the most part, tend to come up as our cadets, and a number of them go away to school, come back and ride with us when they're home. And they are lifesavers, especially over the summertime and during the holiday period. We'd be in trouble without the students. And I know I can speak for New Providence because I rode there and I saw the help that we got from the students when they came home. Those students who come home have taken their EMT, they work through the same process with us, and they were made regulars, and now they come back and they ride. And several of them ride in their own college EMS agencies. We have 12 cadets ranging in age from 16 to 18. Why 18? 18 is an adult. 18 so long as they're still in high school. Once they graduate from high school and they're 18, they become a regular member. Anybody from Berkeley Heights who has kids, grandkids, what have you, who might be interested in doing this, Berkeley Heights recruits in early spring from the sophomore class. So again, a little bit of recruitment. New Providence has around the same as Berkeley Heights, and Summit has over 80 riding members. Again, it tends to be based upon what the population of the community is. Summit's a larger community. They have more people to draw on. They have more members. All 3 pretty much fit the same membership categories, except Berkeley Heights does have an auxiliary membership. We have auxiliary members that help us with the non-first aid types of things. Rich is an auxiliary member with the squad. He rode with the squad. I rode with Rich when he was on, and he helps us out occasionally on grants and things of this sort. The makeup is pretty similar. Students, business executives, retirees, white and blue collar, RNs, people who work from home, at-home mom and dads. We run the gamut of who joins and comes on. No, yeah, this is my membership kick. No, you don't need experience, okay? All you need to do is basically be pretty healthy so that you can do the work that's required out there, okay? But we have all kinds, and just about, except for the RNs, I'm not aware of anybody else that's ever come on a squad with any type of medical training. You get it while you're in there. We occasionally also have employees in town whose employers say, yeah, you can help the squad out, and it varies. We don't have any now. We had several a couple of years ago. That changes, but it's a big help to the towns, just as it was to Roseland, to have what we call industrial members. The call volume, yearly averages, again, tends to be based upon, yearly averages tend to be based on population. Berkeley Heights averages around 800 calls a year. During COVID in 2020, we had over 1,000 calls. So things like this will pop up the call volume. New Providence runs, I believe, between 600 and 700 calls. They cover their nights, their weekends, their holidays, and they have assistance from Union County EMS during the daytime for the days that they don't have crews available. Again, it goes to the membership situation. Summit has over 2,000 calls a year, but in recent years, they've been averaging between 2,300 and 2,500 calls. I believe they were almost 2,500 for 2025. Finances. How do we run this? Berkeley Heights, New Providence are very dependent upon community contributions and business contributions. In Berkeley Heights, the town assists us by providing the fuel, by providing the upkeep for the ambulances, the maintenance, service. We sold our building to the town back in the 90s when we expanded the building. And we have a long-term lease with the town for that building, $1 a year. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people here who would love to be paying $1 a year for their building. New Providence, again, community and business donations, they get more assistance from the town with respect to the financial end of it. The town also provides them with fuel, their rig repairs and service. However, the municipality owns their building and buys their ambulances. So they get a little bit more help from the community. Summit operates solely on community and business donations and owns their building. Summit has a philosophy, which I agree with, that says we don't want to be beholden too much to the people that sit in town hall. There have been squads that have been closed down by their municipal governments because it became an easier thing to do, or they forgot just what the value of that resource in their community was. And we'll get into some of that a little bit later on. Yes, sir. How much did one of the ambulances cost? Berkeley Heights just authorized, I believe it was $350,000 for a new ambulance that we'll be taking delivery on. They've, like everything else, ambulances and fire trucks, the costs have grown exponentially, far out of what I consider to be the normal inflation rate. And that happens with emergency services. When I started, we did a lot of the extrication ourselves. We didn't have what they call the jaws and all this electronic gear to take cars apart and to get people out. But we were using tools that body shops used to fix vehicles after they were involved in accidents. When that equipment was purchased when the manufacturer and the folks that sell it realized that EMS and fire were purchasing these tools to use them in their day-to-day operations, boy, did that price jump. So if you went in as a civilian for your garage, it was one price. If you went in from a rescue squad or a fire department, it was painted up a little nice, looked really pretty nice. You paid for that paint. I'll use Berkeley Heights to illustrate. From 2011 through 17, expenses averaged over $100,000 a year. 2018 through 2024, we averaged over $175,000 a year in expenses to operate the squad. That included years with significant costs, for instance, 2020, COVID. The expenses then were over $210,000 that year. Negative balances for 3 years with respect to what I mean by negative balances is the income coming in from community, business donations, and what have you, did not meet our expenses for that year. Luckily, we had a couple of years that brought us even and up, but we were in a negative stance. And 1 year we broke exactly zero. Why is that important? Be right with you, sir. Why is that important? It's important because the money that we bring in also goes in many cases to purchasing our ambulances. Berkeley Heights purchases its ambulances. We do not want the municipality to own our ambulances. This gives us more control over how we operate, and not saying anything against any municipality, especially in this area, because they all are very generous and helpful to their EMS agencies. But it just gives us more control over the operations and how we are able to operate. Yes, sir, the question. We don't get, with one exception, we don't get a dime from the state. Okay, there's no money coming in from the state. And by the way, I wouldn't take it if they offered it. I've never seen a state offer of help come without a whole lot of tags on it and a whole lot of, well, now you got to do less for us. So for the community's sake, I honestly believe that it is better for local EMS agencies to operate within their municipalities and work together there. Cost of paid services per call. Paid services run somewhere between $900 and $1,200 per fee, plus mileage per call, one way. And plus the supplies used, for instance, oxygen. The volunteer cost in Berkeley Heights runs about $235 per call. Obviously, we don't have the expenses, a lot of the expenses that the paid services have. We don't have to pay our employees. We don't have to provide benefit programs, if you will, although we do provide benefits. For instance, New Providence and Berkeley Heights have what they call LoSAP programs. The LoSAP program is deferred compensation program, if you will, the length of service program. And people on squads and fire departments who meet certain criteria set down by their organizations receive a contribution from the town into this fund every year. In Berkeley Heights, after 5 years on the squad, you are vested in that, and you can take that once you leave the squad. It can go up in some towns. They have an inflation clause. So in Wayne, I think it's about $1,900. Last year in Berkeley Heights, I think we had 11 people who met the qualifications to get a LoSAP contribution. So it's not something that they're handing out to each member of the squad. You got to work for it. You got to be there. You got to cover your shifts. You got to help the organization run. Most squads, volunteer, do not bill for service. What do you mean volunteer? Don't bill. Some volunteer squads do bill for their services. They find that from a financial standpoint, they just can't make it. An example of that would be Mountainside. Mountainside bills and runs with volunteers, okay? Again, they have needs. Mountainside's a small community. From a financial standpoint, that community cannot meet their fiscal needs, so they will bill. What they call soft bill, as does Union County if they come in. They'll bill you insurance. Occasionally, they may send one bill because the government says they have to in certain circumstances. They won't be after. So if you're in this area, you're picked up by Union County, you're picked up by Mountainside, you're picked up by an agency, a township agency of another town that sends you a bill, make sure they have your insurance information. And I've not heard of anybody who has had an issue with that. It is a cost, okay? It does impact. It impacts, we all have insurance. Insurance companies, they pay out, they up their rates, they change the benefit profile. So there is a cost for having paid versus volunteer. Springfield Bills, they run a combined volunteer paid service because they could not get enough members. So they were forced to start paying for daytime coverage and bringing in per diem EMTs. So there are different things going on. Don't always assume that a volunteer squad doesn't bill, but don't always assume that, well, what are they billing for? They don't need to bill. In many cases, they do for various and sundry reasons. Community hazards, squad impacts. Squads and members are impacted by various hazards in their communities. Berkeley Heights Squad has had to deal with events dealing with industrial and train accidents, as well as incidents on Route 78. New Providence has the train. Summit has train and commercial businesses. But I just want to go over a few of what Berkeley Heights has seen in the years. The Golub explosion and evacuation. I don't know how many of you folks have ever heard of Golub, okay? Golub was a chemical testing company on industrial road off of Snyder Avenue. On the morning of March 17th, there was an explosion at their facility. I live on Division Avenue in Summit. For those of you who don't know that, that's the dividing line between Summit and New Providence. That explosion woke me up. We understand they heard it in Plainfield. That's how loud this was. When my alert went off, all I could hear in the background of the dispatcher, who was 2 blocks away from Golub, was a series of explosions. We had 3 people killed and 1 was seriously injured. This incident resulted in the largest hazmat materials related evacuation in New Jersey. As far as I know, it is still holds that record. More than 1,500 persons were evacuated, including 120 from a local nursing home. The largest mutual aid response in Western Union County. It may well have been the whole county, but I couldn't confirm that. More than 20 volunteer EMS and rescue agencies responded to help with the evacuations and assist Berkeley Heights through several days of covering their town and helping us out with respect to giving our crews breaks and letting us take some time away. The repercussions from this explosion reached across the country and caused evacuations in several other states, including Idaho and California. What happened at Golub was an industrial accident that caused the explosion. They wound up combining 2 gases in 1 tank. I'm getting to what the names were, as far as the gases were, but basically, when a customer took delivery, the customer started using it in their manufacturing, and it wasn't operating correctly. This was in California. So the company notified the supplier. The supplier came down and picked up the tank and brought it to a testing facility in California. The testing facility in California was unable to determine exactly what the mixture was in the tanks. That's when it was sent to Golub and Berkeley Heights. At that time, Golub was the only testing facility in the country that was equipped to handle let's put the explosive chemicals and identification thereof with respect to, okay, what have you got? How are we going to handle this? On the morning of the 17th, the founder of the company, who had just retired, a friend of mine who lived down on Mountain Avenue down the block from me, who was their one of their management people, their key people, a representative from the chemical company, and it was one other gentleman. I'm not sure what his association was. They apparently, at that point in time, found out what the mixture was. The mixture was one that was extremely volatile. And they determined that they needed to vent this tank in order to relieve what they believed was an imminent threat to the area. They had sent off and were awaiting a device which would have let them bleed off the tank in a manner that would have provided some measure of safety. We will never know why they determined that they could not wait for that. They took it by the main building, apparently tried to vent the tank. It blew up. The tank flew back into the testing facility and exploded in the testing facility itself. And Golub at that time had any number of volatile chemicals, including radioactive materials, in their building. When I arrived on the scene, I was chief at that time. The building was in flames. Firemen had rescued one individual who had, as described by the trauma surgeon, war-like injuries, traumatic injuries, including the loss of a leg. He was taken to the University Hospital, survived. My wife was on the crew that did that and happened to run into him about 10 years ago at a business conference, and he's doing fine. We worked through the 17th. Okay, the only problem we have now is one tank sitting down on a bunch of tanks, flickering. I don't know about you, but when a tank flickers, and I mean by that, it flickers, almost seems to go out and then flickers again, I get a little nervous after this situation. So I left, I went to work, okay? The following day, morning, I got to work and I got a call from the OEM, Office of Emergency Management Coordinator in Berkeley Heights, who said to me, you got to get home now. Okay. Came back and found out that due to the fire, there was damage to the tanks, had burned off the names of some of these tanks. One of the tanks, the one that was flickering, and several around it, contained a gas called phosgene, which is a deadly nerve gas. They could not determine whether the spelling on the tank said phosgene or phosphine because it was burned off. Their concern was that if the flame went out, the tank would explode. Long story short, came back into town, arranged for a total evacuation, which went out 1/4 mile initially. Later that night was extended to 1/2 mile around the Golub facility. And we operated out of the DPW and stayed in that situation for 2 days. A lighter moment, if you can, they sent a team in to box it and try and get rid of it. And they said, listen, we need an ambulance to go. Okay, I'll go. So we parked on Industrial Road and the gentleman came up from the chemical company. He says, this is what we're going to try and do, A, B, C, D. And I said, well, how do we know if we need to take a run? He said, see this? I got a little air horn in my portable air horn in my hand. He says, you'll hear that. He says, but don't wait for that. I said, what do you mean don't wait for that? He says, you're going to see me going by you before you hear the air horn. Luckily, we didn't see him going by us. So that was one of the things that we wound up experiencing from an industrial standpoint. Railroad hazards. Since I started with Berkeley Heights Squad in 1971, we've probably had between 12 and 16 fatal accidents on a railroad tracks in Berkeley Heights. What I'm showing you here is an area that that transit now calls Dead Horse Curve. I'll tell you why in a minute. This bridge, we have had, I believe it's more than half of our total fatalities have occurred around that bridge, and it has been mostly young people. They walked the tracks, they were riding their mini bikes. You cannot hear the train coming or the whistle if you are directly in front of the train. Please, don't anybody run out to the tracks and stand there and see if you can hear it, okay? But you can't, I was amazed when I was told this. If you're standing on the tracks, you cannot hear the train coming. And if you're directly in front of it, you will not hear the whistle. That unfortunately resulted in a number of fatalities, including one where a rider was coming down, decided to take her and her horse, take the tracks back into Long Hill Township. She made it, the horse did not. There is a curve, if you look at the, if you look at here, you can see the curve at the top of the picture. There was no sight. There is no sight plane from that area of the bridge. You don't know what's right around that corner there. and the train is moving at a speed that you have literally seconds to make a determination. The last unfortunate situation I was on there, it was a group of young boys, and they were walking across because it's a great place to fish, walk across the track, going to Long Hill Township. And they heard the train, and friends ran off, and he put himself next to the wall and was standing next to the wall away from the tracks. The train coming around hit him in the butt. Apparently forced him into the wall where he dropped through an opening there into the river. We got him out. He was still alive at that point in time. And the only reason we knew that what had happened to him was in examining his clothing. Okay, the county prosecutor's office found an area that looked like it had literally been melted smooth across the backside. If you have grandchildren, children, these are not playthings. These are not playgrounds. I say that having been somebody who killed a lot of pennies in my day on the railroad tracks, okay? These are not areas that kids should be around. I have been on far too many calls where the parents wound up appearing at the scene. You really do not want to be in a situation like that, okay? So please, take care of yourself. And to all of our well-experienced individuals in the audience and on Zoom, I know we figure we know it all, but we still have that little voice in the back of our head that says, this may be a pretty dumb thing to do. If that little voice is still talking to you, listen to it. It is a pretty dumb thing to do. Route 78. Route 78 incidents. Before Route 78 came through, Berkeley Heights was a great little town. We'd have accidents down in Glenside. Glenside Avenue was our place where we knew we were going to have the worst accidents. We'd have a couple a year, and that was it. Then 78 came through. 78, for those who don't know, who may not have lived in the area then, 78 stopped at the bridges over Plainfield Avenue and sat there unfinished for 20, 30 years. So you could get on at 287. You used to not be able to get all the way down. Then they let you come down to Watchung and then down to Drift Road off of Plainfield Avenue. Still closed, okay? We had some incidents up there. We had the individual who drove east in the westbound lane till he hit the bridge and kept going and hit the rocks and the pile of dirt at the end. Yes, he'd been out for an evening. He had himself a very good time. And we had other incidents. Then they finished the Route 78. I, again, was chief when it was finished. We took a drive. I pointed my people the access routes, the egress routes, how to get on, how to get off, and impressed upon them the need for safety if they were out there. Remember, none of us had experience with high-speed, limited access roads and out on emergencies. I told them things are going to get crazy. Well, what's he talking about? 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, no accidents. And they kept looking at me like, what are you, nuts? Wait, I was just getting off from the paramedic program at 7 a.m. one morning, was heading back into town when the paramedics got an alert for a serious motor vehicle accident by the McMain Avenue Bridge involving what was reported to be a fuel tanker, airline fuel tanker. Got on, went with them. Long story short, somebody had a blowout, drove under the tanker. Tanker would drag the car, no fatalities. And we had 5 injuries that we had to take care of and treat. From that day, 10 days out, we had 8 accidents on that highway. No one ever said to me again, oh, we're not going to have anything out there. 78 is dangerous. And all of you can help if you happen to be on any high-speed lane. New Jersey now has a move-over law. That's there for a reason. Myself and other members have literally worked this far from cars in the lane going by us at 60 miles an hour. Now the process in Berkeley Heights is we go out, the fire department goes out with us. It's the same in Summit. It's pretty much the same all along the highway now. And we shut down a lane on the right side of the accident and a lane on the left side of the accident. Okay? Being limited access highways, I hear plenty of complaints and complaining from people. Okay? But we need to be safe. We need to keep the responders here safe. Okay? This is the intersection of Diamond Hill Road and Route 78. We've had more accidents at this intersection than any other intersection in Berkeley Heights. People go to make the left hand, and you'll notice striping and safety striping. That used to be a lane. So you could come up both lanes, you could make the right onto the entrance ramp, or you could go straight up. Somebody finally realized that everybody in the left turn lane coming down the hill figured, well, if you're in that lane, you're going to 78, I'm going to make the left. After about a half a dozen serious accidents, they figured they needed to do something, so they striped it out. Did it stop them? Oh, no. You have some very stupid people behind steering wheels. But it's limited it significantly, okay? Be aware of what's going on around you when you're dealing with a high-speed highway. The picture on the lower left was a tandem dump truck that came from the westbound lane into the eastbound lane through the center divider. Yeah, those Jersey barriers don't stop everything, and kill the driver. Not so long ago, 8 months or so, I responded to another accident where a tandem dump loaded went from the westbound lane through the guardrail center divider, down that mountain, and into the eastbound lane. Thank God there was a break in traffic. Unfortunately, the driver died before we could get him out. The traffic that's on that highway is, I don't even have a word to describe it, okay? People drive stupidly. They look to save 15 seconds. They look to save 30 seconds. They get angry at you if you're not moving along fast enough. And they do stupid things. The section of road westbound from Diamond Hill Road to Plainfield Avenue was known by law enforcement as the death mile on Route 78 for years. And that was because in Berkeley Heights, really no place to put radar up. You can run radar pretty effectively west of Berkeley Heights. There's places, even east of Berkeley Heights, but in Berkeley Heights, there's no effective area where they can really sit to run radar effectively. So drivers were tending to really speed up. It's dangerous out there, folks. Be careful. If you see something going on, please move over. Give us a chance, give us the lanes. Believe me, we really do need it. Okay. The other thing that we can talk about, weather. I mentioned earlier that some municipalities let their squads fold or folded their squads, not understanding the value of the organization that they had within their town. Okay. They have, and I'm forgetting what they call, but they have groups that they put their CERT teams, certified emergency responders, which are intended to help the PD and what have you. And in large scale, then it's directing traffic, what have you. But when you have a volunteer EMS agency, you have a dedicated group, 20, 30, 40 people who have trained all of their emergency service lives for how to deal with emergencies, how to act, resources, and what have you. I'm not sure how many people were here for the 2011 Halloween Snowmageddon, when this entire area was closed, pretty much closed down for a week. This happened a week before Halloween in October. I happened to be working the 911 desk at Summit Police. Looked outside, it's raining. Okay, maybe it's going to mix with some snow. At 10 o'clock, I got an emergency notification from the state saying, you're now in winter weather area. Okay, how bad can that be? 15 minutes later, it turned to big wet snow. Within an hour, Diamond Hill Road was closed. The reservation was closed. Summit Road coming up from 22 was closed. And we wound up going into a situation where we had no power and no access to Overlook Hospital from the west for 5 days. I say to municipalities and I say to their people when they're talking to me about, when I was president, they're talking to me about, well, we really don't think we want the squad. We're going to pay a hospital to come on in. And my response to them is to talk about this accident. And what I say to them is this. Okay, let me ask you a question. If you had, and we've had other weather issues. This is the one that everybody tends to remember because it was so unusual. When you have a local EMS agency, I said, you have an ambulance in town, right? Oh, yeah. I said, do you know that you pay a hospital or paid service, what have you? They're not putting an ambulance in your town. They may start out putting an ambulance in the town, but they're not going to leave it there, especially for a smaller town like New Providence, Berkeley Heights, because they don't get the call volume. They have to be able to pay their bills. So that ambulance covers, I'll give you an example. Atlantic Health has an ambulance that covers Mountainside during the day, Warren during the day, Watchung during the day, and Summit Medical Group at One Diamond Hill during the day. You think that one ambulance is able to pick up all those calls? We'll talk about the mutual aid system, but trust me, they are not. They're also supposed to cover Lantern Hill. Lantern Hill got statistics when they were looking to build the additional buildings, which they're now not going to do. And we found out that one year, Atlantic Health had picked up 23% of the emergency calls at Lantern Hill. The following year, they were able to do 50% of the ambulance calls at Lantern Hill. Do you know who picked up the rest of those calls after the squad got called out there? Berkeley Heights, County, Summit, Chatham, anybody they could get. So I said to the mayors, what are you going to do if you have a storm like the Halloween snowstorm? Oh, we'll get them in. I said, what happened to you in the Halloween snowstorm? Oh, it was terrible, boy. Wow, we couldn't get anybody in, and they stopped. And at least he had the courtesy to look a little sheepish. And I said, couldn't get anybody in here for days, could you? I said, you have a group of people with equipment and ambulances. They will find a way out, but more importantly, they will get where they are needed in your town. And that's why it's so important that volunteer EMS agencies stayed in Overlook Hospital. And we'll finish up with this. Berkeley Heights uses Overlook quite a bit. Springfield Avenue was closed. River Road was closed, poles and trees. Valley Road was closed. Glenside Avenue was closed. Mountain Avenue was closed. The only way we could reach Overlook Hospital was to get on 78, go down to 24, get on 24, get off at Broad Street, and come in from Milburn. And that lasted for 4 days. These storms are going to happen again. And your EMS volunteers are going to be right there helping out with that, with floods, with any type of emergency that happens in there. So that's what's really, really important. The golden age of volunteer EMS. The 1970s to the 2000s. We had over 600 active volunteer squads in New Jersey. Most towns had at least one dedicated first aid or rescue squad. Geographically larger towns could have 2 or even more. Parsippany has, I believe, 3, covering various sections of their town. 24/7 staffing, completely volunteer, and services were free to residents, funded through donations and town support. EMS training evolves. Early EMS courses focused on basic first aid and care, mostly through the Red Cross. However, training programs grew to include additional things like CPR, oxygen, childbirth, emergency vehicle operation. So our training groups, our training schedules increased as the years went on, and it became known that we really did need to have some others. This eventually led to the development of more formalized or inclusive programs like the Emergency Medical Technician, EMT, the Emergency Medical Responder, EMR. I will tell you that the First Aid Council, EMS Council, when the first EMT program came out, and that started in 1978, we had a training program that ran 110 hours when you took all of the pieces that we split it up so that we could teach in our buildings and people could get this at their convenience where it fit into their schedules. The first EMT program was 71 hours and 10 hours of hospital time. So we were training our people for a longer period of time in subjects than the EMT program did. It got more interesting. And we'll go into that a little bit later. Statewide EMS infrastructure. In 1967, the state established the New Jersey Office of Emergency Medical Services, and it marked the start of a regulated statewide EMS system. Training protocols, ambulance equipment, all became standardized. Over the next decade, the state introduced task forces to improve hospital care standards, trauma hospital, burns, spinal cord, cardiac, stroke, and other specialized care. And in 1981, they designated their first level 1 trauma centers. We are in an area of where we're lucky, and I'll explain why in a minute. More of our volunteer squads continue to grow and modernize, better communications. I've got radios in my backpack. No wonder I see a chiropractor. They went from this to this. And they went from, 10 ounces, 12 ounces to 5 pounds, and from 2 channels to, 150 crazy. Improved ambulances and more formal training for EMS members. And with it all, the neighbor helping neighbor philosophy remained a constant for all volunteer squads. If you ask a volunteer squad member, why do you do this? We'll give you a lot of different reasons. When I joined the squad at age 21, I thought, hey, man, I get to drive an ambulance, red lights and the siren. Trust me, I would not do it as long as I have done it if that was the only reason that I stayed wanting to do it. I grew up in this area. I do it, and I've had a remarkable experience in doing it. When I started doing it, I was taking care of some of the parents of my friends, grandparents of my friends. I didn't know. But as I stayed with it, matured, I never say older, matured, I began to treat friends of my parents. Then I began to treat grown kids and their families that my parents knew their families. I don't know if any of you have ever had to call on local EMS, but I can tell you what I have been told by the people that I have seen, and more than half the calls I go into, somebody knows me. The sense of relief that they experience knowing a person that comes through the door to help them is immense. It lowers the anxiety level. We used to have a saying that we put on our call sheets when we did nothing else but pick them up and put them in the ambulance and take them to the hospital. We called it TLC, tender loving care, because that's what your volunteer squads deliver. We live in these towns. We know lots of people. We know the area. And when we walk through a door, likelihood is one of our crew has a tie-in to the people that we're coming to help. And that's why I continue to do it. And I'll continue to do it as long as the good Lord gives me the health. I don't know about the brain power, but the health to continue to do it. I've got one good knee. The surgeon wants to do the other good knee. And I've told him, I don't know about that yet, but I will continue to do it. And I hope never to see any of you officially. Our mobilization system. The EMS Council of New Jersey, when they started, was called the New Jersey State First Aid Council. And they realized, and we'll get into here, that there was a system needed for squads to be able to call upon their neighbors' squads in larger scale incidents. And larger scale incidents back in the day could be 2 patients. But there needed to be a way that we could do this. So they started working on a mutual aid mobilization system. Initially, all the requests for additional immediate help was made by picking up the phone and asking for the chief operator. She had a master list of squad phone numbers and would call whoever was needed. She'd go down the list, and that's how you got your mutual aid. The system had its baptism of fire on Sunday, 9/28/1934, when the luxury liner, the Morro Castle, caught fire off the Belmar coast. 34 volunteer squads were notified and responded. Now, this was 1934. 1927 was the very first volunteer squad in New Jersey. So you can see how we were growing. And these squads were basically down in the shore area. So we are growing. The Spring Lake First Aid Squad led the rescue operation. They worked with the Coast Guard, New Jersey Air National Guard, the Merchant Marines, and local fishing boats. In 1937, the EMS Council proposed the first statewide dispatch system for council and non-council squads. While the council is the largest association of volunteer EMS agencies in the country, not everyone belongs to us. Okay, so you have council and non-council. We needed to include everybody. State police were proposed as a coordinating agency of this operation. And the New Jersey State Police, State Council emergency setup went into effect that year. A call to the nearest state police troop headquarters will result in the dispatch of additional squads, specialized rescue equipment, and anything else we needed, including state police agencies. The system's first major incident resulted in 29 mutual aid volunteer EMS organizations responding to the Hindenburg disaster at Lakehurst Naval Air Station. So we've been around for a while. Been there, done that. The EMS Council continued to coordinate and oversee this system through the early 2000s. We were the overseers of the mobilization program. We had state mobilization chairs. We had district mobilization people who would coordinate. We would do things like you needed an ambulance and you were in Illinois, and now you wanted to come home. Our mobilization people would work with volunteer squads in Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and would start a shuttle to get you back home. No, we don't do that anymore. We don't have enough people. But it went on for quite a few years, and they mobilized. They also set up the means by which Berkeley Heights could get New Providence, Berkeley Heights for Golub, got to 20 agencies. Everything was run through the council and was established through them. Some of the events that we've been involved in was the planning for the transfer of wounded servicemen and women from Newark Airport to hospitals in New Jersey and surrounding states in preparation for Desert Storm. Thankfully, we never had to implement that. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing. The council was contacted by New York City EMS for assistance, and a total of 69 volunteer and paid EMS squads responded into Manhattan to assist. The largest mobilization event in New Jersey's history was the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center. 450 EMS agencies from New Jersey were dispatched to various locations in New Jersey and New York City. Over 90% of those units were from volunteer squads. In addition, volunteer squads staffed an additional 350 ambulances statewide to cover the routine 911 calls in their communities. Volunteer squads continued to assist New York City for several weeks after the attack, and they continued to provide their communities with 24/7 coverage. That would not happen today. Because from over 600 volunteer squads, we believe there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 275 volunteer squads. Well, wouldn't the paid services step in and pick that up? The paid services don't have 400 ambulances between them. We'd probably be going to other states, Pennsylvania, Delaware, wherever we could bring in resources, which is what we did for Hurricane Sandy. Okay? We would not be able to do that. We provided half the response to the Miracle on the Hudson. We brought volunteer squads up. There were about 50% of the responding agencies from all the way down to by the Garden State Arts Center and staged all up and down the Parkway. No, I wasn't chief. I had joined Hoboken EMS at that point in time. I was home and was watching TV when my wife called, and she said, "Turn the TV on." I said, "I got it." She said, "A plane hit one of the towers." And I looked at it and I said, "Okay, I've got to go." She said, "Well, what do you mean you got to go?" I said, "This is not an accident." I do not know how I knew, but I knew. I got out of there. I went to Overlook Hospital where we were coordinating and pulling together. And then since I was part of the state mobilization committee, I was sent to Hoboken to coordinate the response into Hoboken. It's an eerie feeling to go down 78 and to go down the extension and see no traffic. I got off because the paramedic unit I was with had been assigned to this park down there. Okay. So they said, well, how are you going to get to Hoboken? They said, there's nobody coming. I said, trust me. I got out of the truck, lift my thumb up, and here comes a pickup truck. Guy says, where you going? Hoboken EMS. He said, okay, I'm Hoboken Fire. Come on. Drove into Hoboken. I spent 2 days in Hoboken. We deconned and checked almost 16,000 people through Hoboken during that time. I believe we had hundreds of injured. I don't have the exact numbers to give you, but we basically coordinated everything coming over through Hoboken from the site. We saw more people and did more work in Hoboken and Jersey City than they did on the setup that they had at the park. The end of the second day, I went into Jersey City and I was an EMS task force leader while we tried to make entry. One of the groups was trying to make entry to the towers through the path tubes, which turned out to be flooded, so no entry was made. But we coordinated supplies. We were still getting casualties and still getting people over from Manhattan. And I worked there for 2 days. I did not go into New York City for 20 years, Lower Manhattan after that. I could not. It still affects me. It affects a lot of us. I was lucky in that I wasn't in the area itself. Okay. The EMS Council has an EMS memorial, 9/11 memorial down at Keyport. It overlooks Lower Manhattan, where the towers were, and on out are the names of all of the EMS people who died as a result of both the 93 and the 2001 tragedies at that site. So we all pray that we never beat that with respect to the use of our mobilization system. Volunteers still matter. Cost savings for municipalities, local responders. Again, we talked about this, who know their community. Go to this address. Okay, I can't get there from here. What do you mean? Well, I go like this. Somebody coming in from outside, they're going to go like that and then realize they can't get there and they're going to try and find their way. Declining volunteerism, increased training and time requirements, unnecessary and cumbersome government requirements, and funding. I was asked earlier, what do we get from the state? Not only do we not get anything from the state, but we get things taken away. Back in the 80s, we lobbied and put together what we call the Volunteer EMT Training Fund bill. And what that bill was intended to do was to cover the expenses to train volunteers as emergency medical technicians. Over $10 million have been removed from that fund by 2 governors. Governor Whitman took $5 million. John Corzine took roughly $5 million. Now we get from OEMS, well, we don't have enough money to cover all of your training. It used to cover all of the training and recertification costs that were incurred. No longer does. It covers the core programs, but it doesn't cover the elective trainings. So, and that's a finish up to the answer to your question. What do we get? We don't get, we give. I talked about red tape being problems, and it is. With respect to training, I'm the training lieutenant now. We need to give OEMS 30 days notification that we're running a program for them to authorize. It doesn't matter whether the program identical program has been done by the same education group 50 times. They still need to notify OEMS 30 days in advance, and OEMS has to rule and say, okay, you can do this. It has caused issues with people trying to get training while you didn't get it in time. One of the other red tape bureaucratic situations were training fund forms. Training fund forms. Make a copy, send it in, everything's great. Copies are legal. in this country. They're recognized as legal documents. All of a sudden, well, you need to sign the forms in blue ink. Now, to be fair to OEMS, they claim that it was a recommendation, but I do know training groups who've said they had forms returned to them because the signature wasn't in blue ink. Why do you want blue ink? Well, we need to know it's an original form. Was the person a volunteer? Oh, yeah. Did they take the program? Oh, yeah. What's the problem? We need to make sure it's an original form. We also have a problem in New Jersey with online programs. Many states across the country have phenomenal online programs for elective courses. There is a group whose name escapes me who runs programs for doctors, for nurses, for EMTs, for EMRs, online programs that's approved in basically all of the country, most of the country, except in New Jersey. And they won't deal with New Jersey because New Jersey said, well, you have to send all of your materials to us so we can approve the courses. Now, mind you, this is a group that's been approved for doctors training, nurses training, EMT training in other states. National Registry of EMT endorses it and uses it to recertify their national registry people. We can't use it in Jersey because they can't get it approved. There's also been a severe decline in numbers of EMT instructors. At one time, we had over 700 EMT instructors. My wife and I were two of them. We now have, the last figure I heard was somewhere in the low 200s. That creates severe problems with room in the classes because we have to have a certain number of instructors for a certain number of students. It causes a problem in running those programs. It causes a problem in getting the elective programs done because we don't have instructors to do it. And again, to be fair to current OEMS, years ago, we had associate college professors in biology and in specialized areas that were not approved to be instructors just for that course, that type of a course as an elective, because they weren't an EMT instructor. So we go through a lot of hoops with the state, okay? And again, it's not everybody down there, okay? It's mostly in OEMS, and they have become better, okay? I have not had the opportunity and the pleasure of talking with a lot of the people down there that work there now, but I have heard that they have trying to streamline the situation. But all this has led to a situation where we're now out there trying to recruit volunteers, and it's tough. Some of the things that did help when we talk about cumbersome red tape, just so you know, council was a leader in this, okay? We went to legislature and asked for a bill and got a bill passed that would have permitted us to carry defibrillators on our ambulances in the mid-80s. The director of OEMS at that point in time went to the Governor Kane administration and said, we can't afford to pay for these defibrillators. We weren't asking him to. The bill didn't provide any money because the squads were going to pick them up themselves and put them in the ambulances. So they asked him to veto it, and he did. So instead of being one of the first states with defibrillators on our ambulances, we were one of the last in the country when we finally got the permission to get them in May of 1992. EpiPen. We now carry EpiPens on our ambulances. Again, EMS Council worked with the allergy group to push legislation through with one thing that had to be done. Within 90 days, 3 organizations had to get back with how we were going to do this once the bill was passed. EMS Council responded. Paramedic Advisory Board responded. It took over 2 years for the third party to respond so we could get the pens on board the ambulances. Give you one guess who it was. Yes, OEMS. And they only finally moved, we firmly believe, because the council and the allergy groups began to apply political pressure. Use of CPAPs, glucometers, advanced airways. We've been among the last to get them, and we still don't have the approval to use advanced airways on basic ambulances, on EMS ambulances. States across the country, many of them have already given the approval to their EMS agencies to use advanced airways, and studies have shown they save lives. We still cannot use them because it hasn't been approved. We did have a pilot program in Hunterdon County, which was proven to save lives. Outside groups studied it. Once the pilot program ended, OEMS let it die. Yes, sir. Narcan. Narcan's, it's interesting about Narcan. Narcan, we've saved a ton of lives with Narcan. The interesting thing about Narcan is what happened with political pressure. Now anybody can carry Narcan. Okay, you can go to the drugstore and buy Narcan, and no prescription, and just have it with you in case you need it. I cannot. You're talking to me. I know you don't. I cannot carry it because I'm an emergency medical technician. I cannot buy Narcan and carry it in my first aid kit because it has to be on the ambulance. Police officers get a couple hours training. They have it in their cars. Schools have it. School nurses teachers a brief overview. They can use it. I can't put it in my car because I can't buy it because I'm an EMT. Yes, sir.
Some of the things you told me that perhaps you could borrow resources from a volunteer fire department as needed basis. So it's a question of sharing volunteer manpower with overlaps of training. Thank you.
It's interesting you bring that. Most of the volunteer squads started earlier. It was started through volunteer fire departments. Volunteer fire departments pretty much got out of the business in the 40s. Volunteer fire departments really weren't interested in having EMS. They wanted to be focused on fire. And EMS folks didn't want to be part of fire departments because the focus was on fires and not EMS. So I personally believe that two separate entities work better for both entities, okay? If you may not know this, but there's a big push on now to split New York City EMS out of New York Fire again, okay? Because again, there's budgetary things. We focus on different things. Having said that, I couldn't do my job without the fire department. I've worked with volunteer firefighters in several towns, and in Berkeley Heights, they're great. Okay, those guys do on a scene, those guys will do anything I ask them to. Okay, and they are fantastic and they know their job. But the symmetry with respect to sharing equipment and what have you doesn't exist. Fire departments don't carry what we do. We don't carry what fire departments do for the most part. Okay, there are some minor overlaps with certain types of equipment that they may have. They may have Narcan because they've got EMTs on board, and some other things. But the focus is so different that I believe it tends to work better. Volunteer firefighters are happy that we're out there as far as volunteer EMS because we take the hassle most of the time from the state. I will tell you that squads have recruited volunteer firefighters to be members. We've done that on occasion. The conflict comes up when the volunteer firefighter is on the crew and there's a house fire in the town. Where does that volunteer firefighter go? If I was a volunteer firefighter, I would want to be on the truck going to the house fire. Even though the ambulance is coming, I want to do my thing as a firefighter. So there's conflicts that could create a problem. Volunteer fire departments are having a problem with getting volunteers as well. They've got the same situation that we do, and we're all struggling with that situation. It's been looked at, but I can tell you there are more squads that have split from fire departments in my time with EMS than have joined. Yes. Okay. Historically, the backbone of New Jersey Care, volunteer EMS provided much of the first response capability across many New Jersey communities, especially in smaller towns and suburbs, and it still does today. Towns with a municipal-based volunteer EMS organization have an ambulance in town. Communities without will need to bring it in from the outside. Most times it doesn't matter. Sometimes it does. These squads operate as nonprofit organizations. They rely on volunteers, community support, donations. They have a community-driven, low-cost group. They offer many more services than emergency response. They cover athletics. They give community courses. They give training. They go to schools. Most towns rely solely on volunteers for decades, and many still do. And without volunteers, many communities would lack 24/7 in-town ambulance coverage, mutual aid cooperation, and cost effectiveness. Changes in volunteer EMS over recent decades Some volunteer squads have shut down, merged, or transitioned due to volunteer shortages, funding constraints, changing demographics. For example, the Carteret Squad closed in April 2013 for fiscal insolvency. Some squads adopt hybrid models. They combine volunteer and paid, like Springfield. If you do it right, it does work. Some towns have supplemented their volunteers with paid staff during the daytime hours. Some volunteer squads have started to bill, but volunteer EMS remains vital. They continue to answer thousands of calls. Challenges facing us stem from increased bureaucracy, red tape, and administrative regulations, declining volunteerism, increased training and time requirements, funding shortages. It remains valuable. It's cost effective. A New York State study on this back in the 80s estimated that New York State would cost $1 billion to replace their volunteers. Coming from that study, we estimate that it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to replace the volunteers in total. May not be out of your pocket, but it's going to cost. The community rooted. They know the community intimately, which we've discussed. Mutual aid and flexibility. We collaborate across the towns. Maintaining volunteer EMS is about preserving community spirit, the self-reliance, and public service tradition. Once we go away, we're not coming back. Not going to happen. At risk, shrinking volunteers numbers, funding stresses, all sorts of things that are working against us. The future, hybrid models, recruitment and retention, youth cadet programs, grant funding, continuing ed, simplification of training requirements, reduced bureaucracy and red tape. Volunteers must remain a critical part of New Jersey's EMS fabric for the good of the state. Conclusions, we have roots going back a century. Come on, volunteer squads expanded and provided the care that was needed. And we shaped the EMS system that is in existence today. Despite challenges, we continue to remain essential. We're sustaining volunteer groups through community support and recruitment, and we're protecting volunteer EMS strengthens our communities. Volunteers go away, they're not coming back. Okay? I will leave you with one more thought. In New Jersey, we are required to staff with 2 EMTs. In 2019, when I last updated my records, there were 38 states that required only 1 volunteer and 1 other person. 2 states, Texas and Idaho, never required an EMT. They have a different program of training for their EMRs with an extended ambulance tie-in. I am an instructor. I can tell you those people deliver care to the same level that I can deliver it. So there's a lot of solutions. The willpower doesn't seem to be there yet. Thank you very much. I apologize for running over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, to inform us on such a very important topic. This was a fantastic presentation. Now, if you don't mind, we would like to, if you can answer a few questions. We'll have some people come here and
Thanks very much for your presentation. I have a question. I live in Westfield. We've been there since '72. We have the Westfield Rescue Squad. One of my friends has been involved most of his life in it. I'm curious, what sort of financial benefits are available to volunteers and rescue squads?
Most of the benefits tend to be, oh, I'm sorry. Most of the benefits tend to be municipal driven as opposed. The only state benefit that I'm aware of is a training fund, which helps the squads train their people. So there's less cost to the squads. Other than that and LoSAP, I'm not aware of a lot. We have tried to get tax credits, tax deductions, access to middle income housing for our younger members so that they don't have to move out of the area, that they could possibly be given a certain percentage. We've been talking about 20% of all low and moderate income housing coming in, give it to the local volunteer responders for fire and EMS. Not gathering a lot of traction.
What was that thing you said, ESOP or something?
LoSAP. LoSAP is a contribution made by the municipalities to individuals of squads who meet certain criteria of service within the squad. It's a deferred account. Basically, we get a contribution each year if we meet the standards, and that's held for us and invested until we leave the squad.
So is it a sort of a pension?
I've heard it referred to that. I know somebody who's been on the squad, on a nearby squad, not as long as I have, but he told me the other day that he's got $40,000 waiting for him. So you do it a long time, it can help.
The last question I want to ask you is what my friend mentioned to me in Westfield. He said when he joined it a long time ago, most of the people were just people like you.
Mhm.
He said now in the Westfield Rescue Squad, most people are young people who are going into healthcare and are sort of see it as a training ground for them to go into other fields. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I think the volunteers have always been had a symbiotic relationship with paid services and the medical. We have fed into paid services from our membership and given experience with respect to medical fields for people to determine, well, do I want to do this or don't I want to do this? So yeah, we see that. I don't see a lot of young people, but Westfield's a bit unique. Westfield brings people in from anywhere and they stay at Westfield Squad building. So they can come in from areas that don't have squads. So they get a lot of different people that, want the experience.
Thank you very much, Howard.
May I ask one question too? What about, have you faced any problem with malpractice? Do you carry malpractice insurance?
Yeah, we carry malpractice insurance. However, New Jersey has the strongest limited liability laws in the country. In order to sue a medical provider, a street medical provider, it's pretty much necessary that you are able to prove gross negligence. If you can't prove gross negligence, that case is going to get thrown out. We can be sued. We can have to go to court, but ultimately, unless there's gross negligence, the judge will remove the squad from the lawsuit. Okay, Good Samaritan and limited liability are one and the same. New Jersey has a Good Samaritan law, but it's not really focused on us. It's the limited liability laws that are out there that are specifically focused on pre-hospital providers that give us the protection. If we are grossly negligent, we deserve to be sued, but that happens very rarely.
Yes, very interesting presentation. What are your thoughts on how to reduce the time to allow traffic to begin to flow again after a highway accident?
That's difficult. That's difficult because motor vehicle accidents are force impact accidents. Traumatic injuries at high speed are more difficult to are one of the things that are most difficult to deal with. A lot of times there's extrication involved. A lot of times we land helicopters on the highway and they have to shut the highway down on both sides to land a helicopter for safety reasons. I wish I could tell you that there was a way that I could snap my fingers and we could figure out. Part of the problem from the common computer was also the fact that we will shut down lanes to protect us. And, I, for one, am not going to have them shut down fewer lanes. We try to clear as quickly as possible. State police hate to shut the highway down. Believe me, we have arguments with them at times about their refusal to shut down a lane here or there. We haven't had that in years and years and years, but they do not like to do it because if you shut a highway down, it's proven that you wind up having more accidents further down the road.
Two quick personal experiences. One, it's Route 78, called in the morning. They tell me to go eastbound on the westbound lane. So you got to pull in the wrong exit ramp. You go down, and then bingo, there's a helicopter sitting right in the middle of the road. What do you do? So that was one. Don't worry about it. Anyway, Howie, thank you. Your presentation shows your 50 years of experience here and broad experience. Howie was recognized at last 2 Christmases ago that the annual thing is recognized for his 50 years of experience on the Berkeley Heights squad. So, and I know you may have gotten awards from other places, but you should treasure this one. This is our. Oh, okay. So this is a recognition that we hand out to each person. It has the orchid on there. Summit was the orchid capital of the world back when this was first created, or the area. And so that's our logo. And that's one. And the other is we have our typical old guard salute. Everybody ready? Thank you.